The first thing to imagine is the sound. Not a gunshot, not shouting, a door closing. July 1935, Harlem. A narrow room above a Lenox Avenue storefront where the air smelled of hot paper, cheap coffee, and sweat that had nowhere to go. A folded newspaper lay untouched on the table, its headline already old news. When Bumpy Johnson stepped inside, the hinges groaned once, then settled. The door shut. That sound landed heavier than any threat. Men stopped moving. Cups froze halfway to mouths. One chair scraped an inch too far back and then corrected itself quickly like an apology. Everyone understood the math of the room, who was armed, who was nervous, who had arranged the meeting, and who might not be leaving the same way they entered. No one spoke yet. Silence did the work. Bumpy didn't scan the room. He didn't rush. He placed his hat on the table, slow, deliberate, as if time itself had agreed to wait. Outside, traffic rolled on. Inside, futures narrowed. If you value stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps preserve forgotten chapters of history. Before we go further, tell me something simple in the comments. What time is it? Where you are right now, and where are you listening from? Because this night in Harlem once belonged to everyone, and then to no one. 3 weeks earlier, the trap did not feel like a trap. It felt administrative. Late June 1935, a back office near 125th Street, 2 floors above a numbers runner's storefront. The windows were open, but the heat refused to leave. On the desk, a city map creased at the corners, blocks circled in pencil territories, reduced to geometry. Harlem had become a ledger. Money moved first. It always did. According to police estimates from that summer, Harlem's illegal gambling economy cleared over $2 million a year. Quiet cash, steady cash. The kind that didn't forgive disruption. That number hovered over every conversation without being spoken. Control wasn't ideological. It was arithmetic. A man with ink-stained fingers folded the map, once, then again aligning the creases so they disappeared. Another man counted silently, lips moving, stopping at 50. $50,000 was the figure whispered later on the street. Though no one ever agreed on whether it was a bribe, a bounty, or insurance, numbers change when fear retells them. There were no raised voices, no threats. One man poured coffee and didn't drink it. Another kept a notebook he never opened. Decisions were made through pauses, through what wasn't corrected. When someone suggested a conversation with Bumpy, no one laughed. No one objected either. The location was chosen carefully. Neutral ground, familiar faces, a room that promised talk before violence. According to NYPD surveillance logs that year, over 60% of organized crime meetings avoided known gang headquarters, preferring borrowed spaces that felt temporary. This room fit the rule. The final detail was timing, a weekday evening, traffic loud enough to mask tension, witnesses unlikely. When the men stood to leave, one of them hesitated, hand resting on the folded map, just long enough to crease it again. A mistake, maybe. Or a reminder that once lines are drawn, they never truly flatten out. By the time the lights went off, the plan was already in motion, and statistically in 1935, Harlem men who walked into rooms like this rarely walked out unchanged. The address was repeated so often afterward that it lost its edges. Some said Lenox, some said a side street just off 7th. What mattered was the date, July 1935, a weekday evening when Harlem moved on muscle memory. Bumpy Johnson did not arrive early. He never did. According to Street Talk, arriving early suggested nerves. Arriving late suggested disrespect. He arrived exactly when the block outside was loudest. Cars double-parked, horns, impatient voices overlapping in a way that blurred into cover. He wore the same dark coat witnesses would later argue about. Too heavy for the heat, some said. Others insisted it wasn't about warmth. Inside, the coat weight mattered. Not just physical weight, psychological weight, the kind that reminded a man who he was supposed to be. He walked the last half block alone. That detail mattered. In 1935, NYPD arrest records show that nearly 70% of high-level arrests involved an associate present, someone to absorb blame or bullets. Bumpy chose neither. No driver lingering, no shadow a step behind, just the sound of his shoes on pavement, steady, unhurried. At the door, he paused. Not hesitation, calculation. His hand brushed the frame fingers grazing chipped paint. A small human gesture. The kind you only notice later when everything else feels too large. Inside, men registered his presence without turning fully. One man folded his newspaper again, though it had already been folded twice. Another shifted his chair back then forward, finding the exact middle ground between readiness and restraint. Bumpy took in the room without moving his head. He knew the faces. He knew who didn't belong. He knew who wouldn't act without permission. Power at that level wasn't about dominance. It was about recognition. He removed his hat and set it down. No rush. The felt brim faced upward, empty like a bowl waiting to be filled or overturned. For a moment, just a moment, the room balanced on that hat, on whether it would stay where it was. Outside, a bus hissed as it pulled away from the curb, leaving behind a cloud of heat and exhaust that drifted upward, brushing the open window before dissolving into nothing. The first movement was small, almost polite. A man near the window cleared his throat and didn't speak. Another reached for his coffee and realized too late it had gone cold. Someone else adjusted his jacket cuff, a gesture too careful to be casual. These were not tells of aggression, they were tells of calculation. Then a chair moved. Not violently, just enough to change angles. Enough to remind everyone that space was negotiable and that negotiations could end. According to NYPD internal tallies from the mid-1930s, nearly 40% of underworld shootings began after less than 60 seconds of silence. This room had already passed that mark. Bumpy Johnson didn't speak first. That mattered. He let the others spend their nervous energy. He watched who avoided his eyes, who met them too long. One man nodded too fast, another didn't move at all. The trap revealed itself not through weapons, but through positioning. Two men blocked the door without standing directly in front of it. Another shifted closer to the table, close enough to reach across it in a single motion. No guns were drawn, yet everyone counted them anyway. Then came the human moment. Bumpy leaned forward and slid his hat a few inches to the side. That was it. A meaningless act to anyone who didn't understand rooms like this, but to men who did it signaled intent. It said, "I'm not here to rush, I'm here to finish." Someone inhaled sharply. Someone else swallowed hard. In that second, every outcome existed at once: violence, surrender, compromise. The pressure wasn't physical, it was psychological, and it bore down on the chest like weight. Street lore later claimed a weapon was drawn. Others swore none appeared. What is certain is this: no shots were fired, and that alone changed the balance. In 1935, Harlem police reports show that fewer than 1 in 10 ambush meetings ended without blood. This one did. When Bumpy finally spoke, his voice was low enough that men leaned in without realizing it. No threats, no profanity, just terms, clear, final, the kind that didn't invite argument. Silence returned afterward, but it was a different silence. Not tension, acknowledgement. Someone moved the chair back to where it had been. The trap was still there, but it no longer belonged to the men who built it. By sunrise, Harlem had already rewritten the night. July 1935, newspapers said nothing. Police blotters stayed clean. But the streets were loud with quieter things, half-sentences, unfinished explanations, looks that carried more than words. Rumors traveled faster than facts because facts were dangerous to repeat accurately. One version said a gun was on the table the entire time. Another insisted there was no weapon at all. A third claimed someone's hand shook so badly it knocked over a cup, and that sound ended the conversation. What everyone agreed on was behavioral change. That's how you measure truth in neighborhoods like this. Numbers runners altered routes. Meetings were postponed without explanation. A known enforcer crossed the street rather than pass a familiar doorway. In the week following the meeting, NYPD surveillance noted a noticeable drop, nearly 25% in violent incidents, tied to Harlem rackets, an anomaly for midsummer. The gossip sharpened around one detail: restraint. The idea that violence had been available and deliberately refused disturbed people more than blood would have. Violence was understandable. Control was not. One bartender later said the room had felt smaller since that night, as if walls had moved closer together. Bumpy's name wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. Men referenced him indirectly, him, that situation, the meeting. Language bent around the event, careful not to step on it. A folded newspaper reappeared in retellings. So did the hat. Objects became anchors when memories got slippery. Here's the question that Harlem never settled, and I want you to think about it too. Was the trap ever meant to be sprung? Or was it designed only to test how far a man could be pushed before he pushed back? Another question followed in whispers, quieter but heavier. If power can end violence simply by choosing not to use it, What does that say about the men who always do? No one had proof. No one wanted it. Proof invites consequences. Legend offers cover. By the end of the week, the rumors didn't converge. They hardened. Each version protected the teller in a different way. And in Harlem, that was the surest sign that something real had happened, something no one wanted to fully claim. The days after the meeting revealed what the night itself never could. Patterns changed. That's how you saw it first. Men who had walked openly now favored shadows. Familiar cars disappeared from corners they'd owned for years. A weekly sit-down on 134th Street was quietly canceled. No explanation, no reschedule. According to internal police summaries compiled later that summer, attendance at known organized meetings dropped by nearly 1/3 in the 2 weeks that followed. Fear doesn't always run. Sometimes it recalculates. Bumpy Johnson didn't celebrate. That mattered. He was seen the next afternoon at a small diner, sitting alone, stirring coffee he barely touched. A waitress would later remember how he folded his napkin carefully before leaving, aligning the edges twice. Power, after all, is most visible in restraint. Anyone can make noise. Few can afford silence. Privately, men argued about the psychological shift. Before the meeting, power in Harlem had felt volatile, always one insult away from ignition. Afterward, it felt managed, not peaceful, just contained. Violence became less impulsive, more deliberate, and deliberation slowed everything down. Statistics supported the mood. In August 1935, Harlem recorded one of its lowest monthly tallies of gang-related shootings in over 2 years. Not because weapons vanished, because decisions were delayed, and delay in that world often meant survival. There were costs. A numbers runner was beaten 3 blocks from the river for repeating the wrong version of the story. Another man lost territory simply because he talked too much. Memory itself became dangerous. People learned which details were safe to share and which ones closed doors. At night, storefront lights went dark earlier. Conversations lowered without anyone asking. The meeting room above Lenox Avenue sat unused dust, settling into chair grooves, the air stale with what had almost happened. No one marked the anniversary, no plaque, no date circled on a calendar. But the effect lingered. Power had shifted from loud certainty to quiet inevitability. And that kind of change doesn't announce itself, it waits. Years later, the trap stopped being a place and became a lesson. Men no longer argued about who planned it. That detail faded first. Then the address blurred. Even the seasons softened around the edges. What remained was the sequence, the logic of how power had been tested and answered, without spectacle. In Harlem's criminal memory, that mattered more than accuracy. Before that night, authority had been loud, claimed through threats, reinforced through sudden violence, proven again and again because it was never fully believed. Afterward, something shifted. Power didn't need repetition, it needed recognition, and recognition travels faster than bullets. Bumpy Johnson was never described as lucky after that. That word implies chance. Instead, he was described as unavoidable. Men spoke as if events bent slightly around him, adjusting their paths in advance. That reputation didn't come from what he did in the room, but from what he didn't do. One retired numbers banker put it simply years later. Anybody can walk into a trap and start shooting. Walking out without firing, that scares people. Fear in that sense became quieter, more internal, more effective. Psychologically, the change was permanent. Before the meeting, Bumpy was a figure you challenged carefully. After he was a variable you calculated around. The difference is subtle, but it's everything. One invites confrontation, the other rewrites plans before they're made. The room above Lenox Avenue didn't last. It was repurposed, then forgotten. The table replaced, chairs sold. But the idea remained that there exists a moment where violence is possible, expected, even prepared. And choosing otherwise redraws the map. Harlem never framed it as morality. This wasn't about good or evil. It was about control over endings, about deciding when a story stops escalating. And in the end, that's what the trap revealed. Not weakness, not mercy, but inevitability, the kind that settles into a place long after the door has closed. History often pretends that moments like this are loud, that they announce themselves with headlines, sirens, and permanent records. But the night Bumpy Johnson walked into a trap didn't survive because it was dramatic. It survived because it was restrained, because it forced everyone involved and everyone who heard about it later to sit with an uncomfortable truth that the most decisive acts of power rarely look decisive in the moment. No blood marked the floor, no bodies explained the lesson, only memory did. In Harlem, memory has always been heavier than evidence. It travels through pauses in conversation, through the way men choose their words, through routes not taken. That night became a reference point not because it answered questions, but because it left them open, dangerously open. What does it mean when violence is expected, prepared for, and then denied? What kind of strength refuses the ending everyone else predicts? Bumpy Johnson didn't become untouchable because he escaped a trap. He became untouchable because he changed how traps were understood. From that point forward, power wasn't just about who could pull the trigger. It was about who controlled whether a trigger needed to be pulled at all. That is a fragile kind of power, human, temporary, and unforgettable. Because history doesn't always remember the loudest moments. Sometimes it remembers the silence that followed and the way nothing ever quite sounded the same again.